Humility is one of the most important qualities which you must have. Because if you are humble, if you make people realize that you are no threat to them, then people will embrace you.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Today's guest is John Schuhart. John has an extensive background as a senior executive in the U.S. intelligence community, served in a lot of senior roles. And obviously, I'm impressed with his leadership background. He retired from the intelligence community in 2015 and ever since hung a shingle out and serves as a leadership and executive coach and has done quite well in that realm. So I'm pleased that he's here today. John, I can't tell you how pleased I am that you're here today. And so the intro is very brief. There's more to you. So give us a quick snapshot. What more do we need to know about John Schuhart?
Well, Mike, thanks for having me today. I look forward to our conversation. And thanks for that introduction. You know, basically, I'm a kid from Texas who wanted to be a Marine. When I was in college, I wanted to be a Marine Corps officer, and my eyes were so bad, they said, sorry, if you lose your glasses or contact lenses on the battlefield, you'll probably shoot one of our own guys. And so at that point, I had to do a refigure on my career aspirations. I knew I wanted to do something in national security related, so I went and got a graduate degree, moved to Washington, D.C. in 1982, and eventually ended up working on the budget. And it sounds kind of dry, but in DC, everything revolves around dollars. If you got money, you can implement a program. And if you don't have money, all you got is a policy. So I ended up moving up in the budget world at the White House Office of Management and Budget, then the CIA, and then an agency called the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, where I became the CFO. And basically just got to do stuff and go places that I never dreamed possible as a kid growing up in Dallas. And when I retired in 2015, I decided that I wanted to be a leadership and executive coach, went off and got training, and that's what I'm doing today.
Yeah, love it. Well, relative to the eyesight thing, I can relate to that. I tell people this, and they often don't believe me. It's the God's honest truth. I was always fearful of losing my glasses in combat. And so I carried no less than 7 pairs of glasses with me, 7. And so I had a couple in my pack, one on me with a big bungee cord on me, a couple of, I 7 pairs total within close proximity of my body and all that. But I did tell people, look, if we're ever deep into it and you see me without my glasses on, you need to get very low, because at that point, I'm just shooting at shapes and shadows. So no offense intended, but I'm trying to live, and I can't tell friend from foe at that point, And so fortunately, that never happened. So I can relate to the eyesight. So mine must have just made it across the limit, because I had glasses since 7 years old, and my eyes have progressively gotten worse. So I'm waiting for the day they can do eyeball transplants. I'll sign up for it no matter how much it costs, Got to be somebody out there with a set of peepers they don't need anymore,
Well, nobody's going to want mine. I know that. So
exactly. Yeah, no trade-ins. So listen, I know you've got a consultancy, a coaching practice at this point. Who you have a certain demographic that you work with, and I think it's fairly obvious, but I always ask you who your clients are and what problems do you help them solve, John?
Well, I have a very diverse set of clients. I have my own little coaching company called Graybeard Leadership and Executive Coaching. And at that, I work with people basically at every end of the pay spectrum, from people who are just starting out as supervisors to folks who have been deep in their career and moving up to at or near the C-suite. I do a lot of coaching on my own, and I also do a lot of coaching as a member of the adjunct faculty at the Center for Creative Leadership. And basically, it's really everybody, every level, I tend to really enjoy two sets of conversations. I love working with people who are just new supervisors because they are just typically thrown into the battle or the heat of the moment. Congratulations, you're promoted, go get them with no training. Maybe they throw a pamphlet at them or something like that, and they're quickly above, up to their ears in challenges. I also like working with folks who are at the executive level, having really deep conversations with them about what's the strategic direction or alignment of their company or their chunk of the organization look like. So that's kind of my sweet spot, but I work with folks in between at all levels.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Well, listen, if someone were to press you, and I am, executive summary, what is John Schuhart's executive summary, 90 seconds or less? What's your philosophy of leadership, John?
Wow. It's evolved a lot over time. But I would say is a couple of key pillars are, um, as a leader, I want to develop the next generation of leaders coming up behind me. I think that's one of the key things a leader has to do. And then the other one is really trying to help set the direction for my organization, whether it's the part of the organization I controlled or the broader organization. And I think the way to do that is asking lots of questions, getting people's input, putting together a program on what does it look like, and then running it by folks. And then the last pillar of, I think, my leadership style is trying to set up a work environment where everyone can thrive. It's healthy, innovation's encouraged. When people fail, we don't shoot them. We help them figure out why they failed and how they can do better next time. So sometimes I really, if I was going to summarize it in like one term, I'd probably say servant leader is kind of the overall place that I
Yeah.
really want to end up when I'm leading.
Yeah, I love that. I consider myself a servant leader as well. And in the book that I wrote, um, that was actually coined by, I can't remember the name anymore, but it was coined by somebody in the 50s. But I can show you Marine Corps documents from one of our famous generals, John Lejeune, in 1918, 1919, 1920. He kind of set our teacher scholar. And when he describes leadership, he doesn't say servant leadership because it wasn't a popular term, but he nails it. And so I tell people, while the term, the trademark term, is fairly recent, the concept of servant leadership is not new to the Marine Corps, and it's certainly not new to the world. I mean, if you go back in history, I think most of the very best leaders probably ticked most of the boxes on servant leadership, no matter what the philosophy, the culture, the religion, or whatever it was, the school of I think even today, and I'll get your thoughts on this, even today, I tell people, look, pick an author, pick a training program, pick a philosophy, and go with it. They're all good. But if you study left and right, laterally, you'll find that most leadership development and training programs, much like the human body, we all look different, but our skeleton, bones, arteries, organs, all the same from human to human. And I think the fundamentals of leadership are pretty much the same throughout most schools of leadership. Any thoughts?
Well, I think any leader who puts emphasis on making other people great and de-emphasizing their greatness is going to be on the right track.
Yeah.
Leadership, I think it's individual. Everyone's got different strengths and weaknesses, and the key to really being, I think, a great leader is blending the way you want to lead with your own personality. So you come across as authentic. Most people have a really good BS detector, and when you are acting and talking in ways that are not authentic to you, people quickly see it and said, "Oh yeah, that guy read some leadership book, and now he's throwing some leadership trash talk at me." Yeah, great. Yeah, whatever. So it's got to be authentic and it's got to be part of who you are as a person, because you can't go around faking it 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day, 5, 6, 7 days a week.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Fundamental leadership, you got to be yourself. We'll talk about that later as well. I want to ask you about that. Um, I always ask all of the guests here the classic question, leaders, born or made?
Yes.
It's, you're one of the
And
few that's ever said that. I love that answer. It's clever. You're
well,
one of
I
the few
think
that's ever said that. So please tell us why. Why is it both? Why
sure.
are they born and made?
I think there are some people who just have some sort of natural, I would call it charisma, leadership chops, personality, whatever it is that people just naturally want to follow. But I think that's a pretty small subset of the population and a very small subset of the people who are actually in leadership positions. So I think almost anybody can be a better leader. Many people can be great leaders. And I think really it requires having the intention to be a good leader. And then again, figuring out what's the way I want to lead that's going to be most effective for me and the people I'm leading. And then if people can figure that out, then they got a good chance. If they're not really thinking about it and they're just going through work and life on autopilot, you're probably not going to get there.
Yeah, great answer. Well, listen, as alluded to in the intro, your introduction, John, you've got so much experience as a leader, a senior executive, and then later in your career, an executive coach and developer of leaders. I wanted to ask you some insights on a kind of like a laundry list of leadership topics. So I'll flip them out one by one and get your thoughts on it. The first one is you've already alluded to it, and I said we would get to it. So the first thing I ever was taught, but being a leader in the Marine Corps as probably a young corporal is, you got to live up to being a leader, but you got to be yourself. You can't, if you try to act like the gunnery sergeant or the captain or the lieutenant or whatever, somebody you admire, you can admire him and sift some of his goodness, but you can't act like the gunny. He's 38 years old, 3 tours in Vietnam. He's a hardened veteran, and you were 18 years old. You can't be him. You got to be Corporal Etor. So I know you agree with that, and I know I've read some of your literature in the past, some of your comments on LinkedIn and all that, and it says that you have to be yourself and you have to refine your own unique leadership style. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, if you mean how do you refine it, one of the ways I'd like to get people thinking about that is to ask them, who's the worst leader you ever worked for? And that always brings a smile to their face, just like you did. And they kind of wonder why I'm asking that. And then I said, ask them, okay, what made working for that person so miserable or so terrible that you remembered them? And they'll usually tell me. And I say, okay, now you have a subset or a list of things not to do as a leader.
Yeah.
And I asked that question because I worked for a boss or two that was just pretty awful leaders. And some of my first leadership thoughts were things not to do. I said,
Yeah.
as long as I don't act like this gentleman, I must be on something close to the right track. So after asking
Yeah.
those couple of questions, then I'll ask folks the more obvious ones. Who's the best boss or best bosses you ever worked for? Then what made working for that person, he or she, what made that so fulfilling and so, memorable? Okay, which of those things, which do you want to take, adapt a little bit, massage, and then put in your leadership toolkit? And again, you don't want to do a cut and paste, but take it and figure out how to make it your own so it's unique to you.
Yeah.
So when people start answering those questions and thinking about it, pretty soon they start to come up with some attributes. Sometimes I'll just ask someone, hey, what's your leadership philosophy or your leadership style? Well, some people have ones they really thought about pretty deeply. Most people that I talk to probably don't. The most common answer I tend to get is, I lead by example. And my response is, well, that's great. I view that as like the ante in a poker game. You got to put $1 in the pot to play the hand. So if you're not leading by example, you don't even have a chance. But that's not really a philosophy of leadership. So then, okay, how do we flesh that out? And so just
Yeah.
asking people questions, getting them thinking about, what are how do you want to lead and what kind of environment do you want to create around you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And, I think there's so many traits and habits and behaviors we can go. But one of the ones that I feel is very important for any leader at any level is you have to be self-aware. And I think it's a very valuable trait. I think you have to be perfect character. Zero defects mentality, in my mind, only exists with character and integrity. Everything after that, you're going to make mistakes and all that. But I think you have to be disciplined as a leader. And part of that discipline is you have to be self-aware. And self-awareness branches out into branches and sequels as well. So I want to get your thoughts. Self-awareness, its importance to a leader. Is it important? How important is it? And if so, how can a leader go about enhancing self-awareness, making sure he or she actually is practicing it and gets good at it?
Well, like you, Mike, I think being self-aware is extremely valuable as a leader. And the question then becomes, as you said, how do you become more self-aware? Can you practice self-awareness? I think some people are more naturally self-aware, but yeah, you can become more self-aware. And I ask people to think about yourself as a social scientist conducting an experiment, but you're the subject of the experiment. And then figure out around what do you want to become self-aware. So, for example, let's talk about somebody who wants to lead from a more coaching style or coaching mindset. The hallmark of that is asking lots of questions of people to get them thinking for themselves. So, a very simple thing that someone might do is keep a track for a day or a week of how many questions do I ask? Or what's the ratio of statements that I might compared to questions that I ask? Or another way to gather data would be to write down or record the questions you asked during the course of the day. So just having that intention of conducting that experiment or gathering that data can really help people focus and think more about how they're actually going through the day. I think the challenge most people have, I know I do it, I think everybody does it to a great extent, is we go through the day on autopilot. We do what we've always done without really thinking about it. The busier we are, the more stressed we are, the more we tend to fall back on that autopilot mode, and we just go through the day. But if we can enhance those self-awareness muscles, conduct some data gathering or observation around things we're doing, we have a greater chance of intentionally showing up and acting the way we want to act.
Yeah, good answer. I love that. I I believe, and obviously I'm going to ask you a question on this. I think that a leader can his or her effectiveness also really depends on how good he or she is in the science and art of listening. And I think science, the science is you got to listen to your people, but I've learned that boy, there's an art to it. The best people really are artists at listening. So I think listening and communication skills are critical for a leader. I often think, John, that some people put communication skills before listening. And I actually tend to reverse that. I think if you want to be a good communicator, I think it depends on you being a really effective listener. Otherwise, you may communicate well, but you may be communicating on a different frequency than your people. So I'm splitting hairs here. So I'd like to get your thoughts on leadership and communication skills. How important are they to leaders? Is there a sequence? And if there, whether there is or is not, how can people go about enhancing both sides of that coin?
Well, I think leadership is fundamentally based on good human relationships. You can't be a good leader unless you can build strong relationships built on trust and caring. And it's hard to build a relationship without being a good listener and a good communicator. And I agree with you that sometimes it's much more important to listen well than it is to talk well.
Yeah.
Listening, being a really good listener is really how we learn about the world, how we learn about other people, but it's also how we communicate to other people that we care about them as humans. The more you listen to someone, you're actually giving them one of the greatest gifts that you can give another human is to pay full attention to them while they're
Yeah.
speaking. Now, if you want to get technical, there's listening to respond and there's listening to understand. Some other people have 3 levels of listening or 4 levels of listenings, but I'd like to break it down into those 2 categories,
Yeah.
listening to respond or understand. Most of us spend most of our time in the listening to respond mode. As
Yeah.
soon as you stop talking, I want to have my response spring loaded, ready to fire. And it may be I agree with you, maybe I disagree with you, maybe I want to expand on that, but I'm so busy thinking about what I'm saying, I'm only paying part attention to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when we get to that listening to understand mode, that's when we really start to build a deeper connection with someone. And I'll tell a
Yeah.
story on myself. The best feedback I got in my entire career, I remember it very clearly. It was 1998. I just started working at the CIA about a year before that. I had a more experienced, more mature person working for me. But she was on my team and she marched into my office one day and said, "John, sometimes when I talk, you interrupt me. And that frustrates me." And I immediately knew what she was talking about. I felt like a butterfly in an insect collection that with a big pin through it, stuck in the felt display case, because I knew exactly how accurate that was. And I said, "But I'm really just, most of the time, I'm agreeing with you." She said, "I know, and that still makes me annoyed or frustrated." And I said, "You're right." And that was since 1998, the last 26 years. Is that right? 24 years, 26 years. I've been working on trying to do a better job of listening to understand.
Mm.
And sometimes I'm pretty good at it, and other times my brain snaps back into that listening to respond mode.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great answer, a great anecdote. I'm the same way. If you were to ask me, Mike, what's the one leadership skill you wish you had gotten better at quicker? I would say listening to understand. Yeah, I'm a type A kind of meat eater personality. And, especially when you get experience as you have, John, a lot of times you really do have the answer pretty quickly when somebody's talking, they're issuing a problem. You've seen it before. You really do have the answer. And it's hard to suppress that. It's hard to suppress the listening to respond. And I reported to a guy in the business world who was probably the best listener I've ever been associated with, and I realized, well, I need to be like that. And I was never a bad listener, and I was always what I think myself and others deemed a good leader, an effective leader. But I'm telling anyone that out there will listen, I I spent probably until my early 50s primarily listening to respond. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say that, but it's the absolute truth. Once I suppressed it and just shut up and let them talk more, instead of responding, saying, "That's pretty, go a level deeper on that. What do you think?" Everything just took off on that. The relationships with people and the speaking truth to power and all of that. Any thoughts?
Oh, the best, most effective listener I ever knew was a colleague of mine back in the early to mid 90s. We were both competing for a what do you call it, a promotion into the senior executive ranks. I had more
Mm,
experience. I had more direct job knowledge than she did. She was even junior to me in the rating in the GS scale in the old federal government days. She got that promotion.
mm,
And my boss at the time said, "John, don't worry, you'll get promoted soon. She's just amazing." And I didn't have the language to put around it at the time. So the way I perceived it was that she was an alien with an infrared beam in her forehead that shone a warm, bright light on anyone she talked to. She was a fantastic listener, completely present when talking to other people. And it was obvious. She was really awesome at this. Well, she is now, I think she's still there, the CEO of a little company called General Dynamics. And again, she was bright, smart, hardworking. But I think the real thing that, probably really helped her get ahead was just that ability to be fully present and make people feel like they were the most important person in the world when she was talking to them. And, that's the kind of thing that gets people ahead in the world, whether it's in the government or the corporate world or even the nonprofit. You can build those kind of relationships and build that kind of trust. People are going to follow you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, might seem like common sense, but when we were both talking and admitting we could have been better listeners, listening to understand. But I think the fact that we're listening implies that we're asking questions. And I also think, and I think you agree with this, that part of what separates the good from the really outstanding leaders is their their effectiveness at asking well-crafted, effective questions. How important do you think someone's ability to throw questions out, ask effective questions? How important is it their effectiveness as a leader and maybe even their upward mobility as a leader? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
I agree with you. Asking good, open-ended questions that challenge people to think is fundamental to being a good leader. It's how you learn. It's how you challenge other people to learn, how you get them thinking about new ways to do things. Most of the time, who knows the work better? The boss or the person that actually does the work? And a lot of times you got to ask those questions to encourage them to tell you what they know. Maybe to tell you that what you were thinking about wasn't the best way to think about something. And then if you ask people how they want to pursue a project or how they want to tackle an assignment, they're going to be more committed to doing it if they're coming up with their own plan than a plan that we tell them or impose on them. Plus, if you tell me you're going to have it done in 2 weeks, and what it's going to look like, you've set your own accountability standard. You're going to be a lot more committed to that than anything I impose on you. So if in 2 weeks you're not done or it's not successful, then I can ask you, Mike, what happened? Let's talk about it. But to take the conversation even further, the higher we move up into leadership and executive positions, the less important what we know in our head, the experience and the actual knowledge is, and the more relative importance is the quality of the questions we're asking. Because again, that's what's getting people thinking. And the higher up you go, nobody brings you easy issues or problems. If they were easy to solve, someone else would have figured it out along the way. So when someone's bringing up big issues, you got to ask some good questions. You got to get information out on the table. You got to get everyone's thinking involved. And that's you do that through good questions.
Yeah, well said. Well, everything that we've discussed so far contributes to the implied development of a culture of trust among the leader-led relationship and all of that, and laterally 360-degree trust is what I call it. I'd like to get your thoughts on how important trust is to a leader's effectiveness, and any tips or techniques that they can use to foster, cultivate, maintain, and promote what I call and what others call a culture of trust.
Well, I think, trust is the coin of the realm. If people don't trust you, how are you going to lead them? Who's going to follow someone they don't trust that has their best interest and the organization's best interest at heart? And at its simplest terms, I kind of put trust building as a mathematical formula. It's how well do I know someone? How well do they know me? And what evidence do I see that they honor their commitments? So the more I know you, the more I know your background, your values, your experience, even things like where you went on vacation or what restaurants you like or what shows you're binge watching on Netflix. The more I know about you, the more I'm going to connect with you. And then the more I see that you do what you say you're going to do, whether it's you support me on a project, you deliver information when you said you're going to deliver it, whatever it is, when I see the more evidence I see of that, the more I'm going to trust you. And so at the simplest level, that's, I think, how you build trust. You get to know people, they get to know you, and then you see each other doing what you say you're going to do. If you do those things, you're going to build trust.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. So there's a concept out there. I don't know if it's a noun or a verb, but it's definitely out there called executive presence. And I've been asked to define that, and I don't do a good job at that, John. I'm going to let you have a stab at it, but I struggle with, well, yeah, executive presence is A, B, C, and D. What I can tell people is, look, as a person who was not always an executive, but was down lower in the food chain, so to speak, I maybe couldn't define it, but I knew it when I saw it. I knew it. If three leaders walked in the room or whatever, I was exposed to three different leaders. If someone came to me and said, we're rating on executive presence, who's number one, two, and three, I would have been able to do that. And I may not have been able to explain why, but I just would have felt it and all of that. So I can't do it well. I'm stumbling through this right now. So executive presence, take a shot. What do you think? What is it? How important is it? And is it a learned skill?
Well, you stole part of my answer already. You kind of know it when you see it. And I think, I think everyone, excuse me, has got different ways of finding their own or enhancing their own executive presence. But I think fundamental elements are, is this person, do they come across as sincere? Do their words and actions hang together? Do they seem like they're really authentic to this person? Are they calm? Are they running, or are they running around like a chicken with its head cut off? So someone who's calm, sincere, speaks relatively coherently, not necessarily elegantly, but maybe concisely and clearly, ask good questions. And sometimes it's as simple at the upper levels of an organization is, hey, do they work well with other people, the other people at that level? And again, do I see this person as an executive? Lots of organizations, even the military, you get to a certain level and the top of the pyramid gets narrow very quickly, making the jump from top analyst to senior executive or from colonel to general in the military. Everyone competing for those positions, that next step up, is qualified. They wouldn't be where they are if they weren't technically qualified.
Yeah.
But it's, do they have the emotional intelligence, the ability to articulate a vision? And again, are they calm? Do they project calm? Do they seem consistent and authentic to themselves? Those are the kind of things that people start trying to triangulate. And again, you can't always pin it down with exact coordinates, but you can start to gather that kind of information by getting different people's opinion and just seeing how these people respond, when the going gets tough.
Yeah, I love that. And it's a great answer, much better than mine. I say that if a person has that executive presence, no matter what, a leader's people need to be inspired to achieve the desired end state and all of that. And some leaders are better than others. I say the people that are better at exhibiting and exuding executive presence are more prone to be inspirational and to inspire their people to dig deep and, challenge themselves, reach lofty goals and all of that. So the obvious question is, um, how important is it for a leader to be a good source of inspiration? And then is it a learned skill, and how can people become better at, every leader wants to inspire their team. They want to serve as a beacon of inspiration and all that. I think every leader aspires that. Now, getting from that aspiration to execution, that's the rub. So any tactical hints on how they can do that?
I like to think about this as think on the one hand of motivation and the other hand of inspiration. And I like to think about them differently. To me, motivation is really managerial. It's things like if you perform better, I can offer you a bonus, a pay raise, a better parking spot, more time to work from home. I can motivate you with a cattle prod. If I turn up the voltage enough, you're going to jump as high as I need you to jump. Now, you may not ever work for me again, but I can motivate you that way. Inspiration, I tend to think of is how do I connect people to a goal greater than ourselves? Some fields, this is pretty simple: healthcare, national security, police, etc. Those kind of things, it's pretty simple to draw a link between what you're doing and public safety, greater health, cleaner environment, those type of things. So how do I help Mike Ator figure out what he's doing? How does that connect to this greater good? Where it gets challenging is folks that are maybe they're the accountants in a healthcare organization, or maybe they're the physical security people somewhere.
Yeah.
Doing nuts and bolts, keeping the IT running, those kind of jobs. Well, so can be a real challenge. How do you help those people understand that the people out there on the front lines providing that public interface, that real mission service, how do you help them understand that they couldn't do that if they didn't have IT that worked, if they didn't have transportation that worked, if they're not going to work for free. So the people doing payroll are really essential to making sure that greater public good, that mission is being fulfilled. So sometimes you have to work really hard to help people understand that they're not just down in the engine room shoveling coal, as one old boss of mine used to say.
Yeah, great answer. Well, we're starting to run out of time here, but I want to ask you, this is a question I ask every person that's on the call. You've been led by, observed, worked with, coached, mentored so many leaders over your career, John. So it's a two-sided coin: effective leaders, ineffective leaders. Some would say good leaders, bad leaders. We'll go with effective, ineffective. Any traits, habits, and behaviors that you feel that most of the very best leaders share in common? And then the follow-up is flip the coin around. Do the most ineffective leaders also share some common traits, habits, and behaviors? So let's go with the effective leaders first.
Effective leaders first. I think probably the biggest thing that comes to my mind, or at least resonates with me, is they are about making everyone else successful and creating the environment or the culture in which people can thrive and succeed. The ineffective leaders tend to be people who think of leadership as a way for themselves to stand out, for them to be as awesome as possible, and everyone else in the organization is tasked with making them look good or smart. So to me, that is at least one really key distinction between effective and ineffective.
Yeah. Let's turn the coin over. What about the ineffective? Can you expand upon that a little bit? Any traits, habits that, most of the worst that you've observed with, unfortunately, had to serve with and all that? Did they share some things?
Well, I can think of at least a couple of examples of those type of leaders who are what I would even call toxic. They
Yeah.
thrive by making everyone else feel small or belittled.
Mm.
yelling, screaming, negative remarks, always giving, not just negative feedback, but insulting feedback, calling people dumb or stupid or idiots, those kind of things. And again, maybe it makes them feel good for a moment and superior, but it's not a way to win the hearts and minds of your workforce.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, listen, our time is up, but I can't let you out of here, John, without asking you the fantasy question I ask everybody. Um, if you were able to bring back one leader from the past and spend a day with that person, who would you choose and why?
Well, you warned me this was going to be a question, and I really struggled with this, trying to figure out who's someone I really would want to talk to. And I think the thing I finally settled on was be George Washington. And what I'd really want to talk with him about is toward the end of your second term as president, there was a movement for you to have a third term, maybe even longer. And you said, nope, I want to go back to Virginia, do my own thing, and it's time to turn it over to somebody else. And I would love to know the thought process that went into that, how he avoided the temptation to say yes. I mean, that would appeal to many, many people's ego. They're be flattered and have that kind of opportunity. And, he did that. And that's, I think, one of the key things that made our democracy so enduring.
Yeah, a great choice. Others have picked him in the past. And I know a little bit about him. It sounds like you're far more tutored on him than I am, but I just an amazing guy. And I believe, I don't know if it was at this point, but I believe at one point his peers were actually pressing him to accept the title of king. And he said, we just got done with that. King George, we just got done with that. There'll be no kings in America if I have anything to do with it. And so I agree. The thought process behind that guy, boy, if we could tap into that. So if you can arrange that meeting, please invite me. I'll zoom in and be an eavesdropper. I won't say anything. I just love to tap into it. But boy, our republic is really blessed with having people like that in the past. I mean, they were so smart and so forward looking. I'm not sure they really realized how forward looking they were, because I think all of their thoughts were based upon the study of history and all of that. But a great choice. But listen, it's been a great interview, John. I thank you so much for it. How do our listeners find you and contact you if they wish to engage with you?
The simplest way is just do a Google search for Graybeard Coaching. My website is www.graybeardcoaching.com. They can read all about me, what I do, and they can even download a free PDF copy of my book, The New Supervisor Survival Guide. It's about a 40-page booklet to really help new supervisors get off on a good footing.
No, I love that. I love that. Well, listen, it's been a fascinating conversation, lived up to my expectations for sure. And I thank you so much, John. I respectfully ask you to consider coming back and doing another session someday.
Well, I'd be happy to do that. And thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. Be well, John. Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Pericles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.